next episode of the Curious Podcast. Excited to be with you today. In fact, I did an interview recently with none other than the Dr. Chap Clark, talking about the book Ancient Generation, the book we reviewed in last episode's podcast. And he had some thoughts about it, and he kind of goes into some of his philosophy of parenting. And so we're going to cut away and look at that interview that I did with him. And he has really a fourfold idea of, as your parents, as you're reading through this book, as you're thinking of what to do next, I think he has some great nuggets to share. And so our episode for this week is going to be him sharing his thoughts on Anxious Generation. So thanks for joining us.
How does that translate into parenting? There is a book that came out recently called Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And that has a lot of things that I see are in your books that date back 20 years. So I'm just curious to know your thoughts on, I'm a parent. I have an 18-month-old, and there's also a parent listening who has an 18-year-old, and they're still wondering, I'm wondering, how do we raise our kids in such a time as this? How do we not instill fear in them? But at the same time, how do we prepare them for the world ahead? What are your gut reactions to a parent who's looking for help in how they keep their kid healthy and really on the right track of life for them to succeed and not just be beaten down by the stresses?
I love that because, you are obviously deeply committed to your 18-month-old, both you guys. And those that have an 18-year-old, hopefully you're deeply committed to trying to figure out how to help them. My kids are a little bit older than that. They're 43, almost 40, and 36. I know it's really hard to believe on a video webinar, but my wife is fantastic and deeply loves those three, and so do I. And we still worry as parents, sort of, but mostly we're just grateful as we've gone through these years, and now 5 grandkids. So I'm invested too, man. I mean, this is one you want to get right as best you can. And it's funny. I mentioned in all our webcasts so far the notion of cherry picking scriptures. There's a technical term called eisegesis, which means I am so shaped by the world around me. I'm so fixated in all the voices that tell me what to think that I get my convictions, and then I go looking to the scriptures to support my convictions. I'm scared, I'm frustrated, I'm lonely, I'm figuring out what do I need to take seriously, and I got so many people telling me what to think. So I create these convictions, and then I go to the Bible as a Christian, and I just kind of grab something. Boy, oh boy, that's really dangerous stuff. And I've talked about that in some other things we've done. So here's a big one. Proverbs 22:6, start children off in the way they should go, and even when they're old, they will not turn from it. I came to the conclusion in dialogue with some pretty heavy hitter Old Testament professors that didn't completely agree with my conclusion, but agreed that it was at least plausible. And that is, I don't think all of them agreed and taught me, this is not a promise of God that if your kid does not stay on the path that they're created for, that God wants for them, it's your fault, parent. They agree that that's not what this passage represents. It's not a promise of God that if you do the right stuff, then God's obligated to make sure your kid stays in the straight and narrow. That's not how Proverbs works. That's a whole nother conversation. Maybe we ought to do a thing on how the Bible actually teaches us. But so what is it? Well, it's called wisdom literature, and our Proverbs is good. Is all things being equal, when you do that, your kid has a much better shot. But ultimately, we do know that it's up to that child to decide what path they're going to take. So this verse is often interpreted by us on the transactional relationship between us and God. As long as we do our part, he's got to do his part. And the kid just becomes a bystander in it. No, that's not how faith works. But also, it's what's my job? I got to start them off in the way they should go. And we interpret that as we know exactly what the way they should go is in practice. And I'd say Generally, this is talking about the way of the Hebrew child that is rooted in household, which is larger than nuclear family, the community of faith in the household, the clan, the tribe, the nation. So yes, this is basically the way they should go, but in practice, it comes down to the kid taking their steps, walking on the way they're going to go. And that is a way you cannot control. You cannot control the way they should go. It's their journey, not your journey, that you are called to steward. You're a steward of this child to create the environment where, as they grow up, they are making the choices, God willing, that are going to lead them into the most faithful and productive and thriving life that they can. So how do we create that environment? What do we do? And I got 4 things. I promise you haven't read a parenting book. Okay? Just let me tell you that much right out of the gate. I want to give you 4 things of creating the environment to give a kid the best shot that they're going to walk with the God who created them and loves them. It doesn't mean they're going to, but it means that you're doing your part to maintain the ability for you to figure out in politics, in lifestyle, in chaos, in technology, anxious generation. Maybe I'll say a few things about that in a minute. Okay, here we go. Here's the first thing. You got to create an environment of joy in your household. Scott, I know that you and Charisse, this is one that's really hard for you guys because you're really sticking to muds. I mean, you're Christians, so you're boring, mean people. All right? No. Yeah, I mean, you guys are, when you are free, you are incredibly fun, great people, and you want Levi to grow up in that kind of environment where that kid knows that the gospel is about joy. Old commentary, great commentary on the book of Philippians that was subtitled Journey into Joy. Because the whole book of Philippians is about, don't you know that that's what the gospel comes down to? Is it's the second word in the fruit of the Spirit. Love's first, and then joy, and then peace, and then patience, and you go from there. Create an environment of joy. And where I was mentored by people that were, first of all, the youth ministry community. Youth ministry community has long thought for decades and decades and decades, Young Life, the church, Youth for Christ, is that God has given us this capacity for joy, and the Spirit is right there driving that. Mike Yaconelli, who founded Youth Specialties, pastor, thinker, prophet, died 21 years ago on the day we're recording this, actually. He wrote a book called Dangerous Wonder. Get that book. It's great. Now, it's not a theology book. Don't think you're getting something that's just going to be stuffy and you got to write papers on. No, read it with your favorite cup of coffee or tea. Here's what he says. He says, the greatest enemy of Christianity may be people who say they believe in Jesus, but are no longer astonished and amazed. Jesus came to rescue us from listlessness as well as lostness. He came to save us from flat souls as well as corrupted souls. He came to save us from dullness. Our culture is awash in immorality and drowning in dullness. We've forgotten how to dance, how to sing, and how to laugh. That's his book, Dangerous Wonder. Boy, we're drowning in dullness. What's the first thing your neighbors, as a person of faith, think of Christians? You ever thought about that? How would they describe Christians, just in general? I would bet joyous would not be on the top 5, maybe even 10. And that's why I love in Mark 10, that great little passage of people are bringing little children to Jesus to have him touch them, Mark 10:13. And the disciples stopped the kids because children weren't valued. And Jesus goes, Let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Could it be somehow there's the joy of a 3-year-old that when you say we're going to recess, grab the hand of your friend, that they jump from that desk and they grab the hand of the kid next to them and they go, we're going to recess, not trying to figure out who they could touch and who they could walk with. Just this abandoned sense that life is good. And that's the first thing. Have fun with your kids, atmosphere of joy. Wake up in the morning and do all you can to have a discipline of a joyous celebration that day. That's first. Second thing, this is going to sound like the exact opposite of the first. That's why I did the first one. All right, Scott, you ready?
Okay.
Is foster critical and independent thinking, even in when Levi gets to 4 years old. Help Levi to figure out, given his own stage at 4 years old, or 7, or 18, or 28, or 40. What do I think? Here's what the voices are telling me, and there's so many of them. How can I be a critical thinker and not be a critical person? How can we have our children actually be careful in what they are convinced of, as opposed to sliding into groupthink or being swept in to what one faction or another would say this is what's true about life? No. To have them going the way they should go, they need to actually be discerning people. Paul says to Timothy in 1 Timothy 4:16, watch your life and doctrine closely. Persevere in them, because if you do, you will save both yourself and your hearers. 1 Timothy 4:16. You got to teach your kids how to watch their life and what they believe closely. So give them the chance to talk about things. And in a book that Kara Powell of the Fuller Youth Institute and I co-wrote called Sticky Faith, there was research we relied on to help us to understand why did some kids stay with faith as grew up in a family of faith, and many fell away or walked away. And one of the key markers for the kids that stuck with their faith after they had gone through raised as a Christian into adult life was they were given permission throughout the journey to doubt. A kid that feels like it's okay for them to express doubt or wonder or even a possible critique of a comment or a perspective is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. You want Levi in a way that's respectful and opens up to dialogue, as opposed to one that just kind of comes back hard. Teach our kids how to be critical thinkers and reflectors. Third, this is one that a lot of Christians, especially in a chaotic world and a world so divided, but that's kind of to expand your children's horizons and perspectives. Joy, teach them to be critical and independent thinkers. And thirdly, it's your job, if you want them to go on the way they should go, is to prepare the child for the road, because you can't prepare the road for the child. I'll say that again. You can't prepare the road for the child. So you got to prepare your child for the road. Critical and independent thinkers, part of that. A lifestyle of joy and freedom as a child, Mark 10. But this one, you've got to get them into exposure to other people and ways of thinking. It's a good thing. When I was a senior pastor, I remember at one point giving our congregation a charge to allow our church to be a community of dialogue, where we invite those who would disagree with us to come and be with us and share with us their perspective and why, so that we may learn who they are to love our neighbor, and also perhaps to share what our hope is as witnesses of Jesus. And an elder actually and I were out to breakfast, and he goes, I really didn't like when you said that. He goes, I don't want to bring in people that disagree with me. I said, why not? He goes, because I don't want to be indoctrinated. And times like that, I don't know what to say. And I really love and respect this friend. He's a good guy. But that comment stirred me to the bones of a fear to be indoctrinated, so lack of assurance that Jesus is Lord. And there's a grander story that maybe I don't understand, and maybe I have my own doubts, sure. But that I'd be afraid of somebody else's perspective. Can you imagine the Apostle Paul in Acts 17 going, no, I can't be around you guys. I'm not going to walk around your town, look at your idols. I'm not going to be in dialogue with you about what I think and what you think. The gospel brings freedom and ability and joyous connection to other human beings, and gives us the ability to discern how to be careful and how steps to walk into. But man, let's get in the game. Let's teach our kids. Let's make sure that instead of doing the expensive ski vacation over spring breaks, maybe, that we go and spend time with people that are way different, broken, in need of help, not to do daily vacation Bible school in Mexico, but go to Mexico and sit down with people that don't have the next meal, that they need a home, but not just to build the home, but to actually listen and learn from and love people that are beyond our normal scope of living. And that leads us to the fourth thing. We've got to model and teach the lived call of the gospel is loving others. Those four things, that's what you got to do. One, lifestyle of joy. Two, critical and independent thinking. Three, expand their horizons and perspectives, just open their eyes to the world out there that Jesus loves. And lastly, make sure that the lived call of the gospel is loving others, service, and sacrifice. Okay, Scott, come back at me, brother. Scott Cody, pastor of Mission OC in Orange County, and Chap Clark here, longtime professor who has a lot of opinions. But if you're interested in getting in the game, join us. Go ahead, Scott. What do you think? Parenting.
Yeah, you just presented kind of your fourfold like values, if you will, or maybe less values and more like strategies in terms of
that's
approaching
good.
your parenting.
Strategies. This is my list that'd be in the Christian book that Dee and I wrote that's out of print. So long time ago.
Okay. So another book that was just written, Anxious Generation, Jonathan Haidt. He essentially presents a handful of ideas that our kids are stressed. We see that with stats of increased self-harm rates, increased suicide rates, and a lot of what he's presenting that as reasons for that are usage of technology, specifically social media and screen time, and how that makes our kids less resilient, as well as like overparenting, overprotecting, not letting our kids explore the world in a way that helps them to discover and pursue their dreams. And as they get older, parents kind of being more and more handoff as opposed to hands-on. And so he kind of argues for the good old days back in the 80s and suggests some things to get us back to that. So taking your fourfold strategic approach, applying to that book, I know you've read it. What are some thoughts? What are things that you agreed with Jonathan Haidt on? And what are areas that you would caution, concern from your perspective that you might say to do things a little differently?
Okay. It would probably fall primarily under number 2, critical and independent thinking. How do we teach our kids to be critical thinker for themselves? And secondly, expanding their horizons and perspectives. Jonathan Haidt is the magic penny of psychology today, which is great. And he's got a lot of good things to say. He's very famous now. He's speaking at all kind of different venues. He's famous for another book that you alluded to, coddling our kids. So that was his take for and podcasts and books and articles and speaking about, boy, we've coddled our kids. We need to go back to, he says, the 80s. I guess he's not old enough because he's really talking about the 60s, not the 80s. He's talking about when Dennis the Menace was actually a menace because he got Mr. Wilson's paper wet. Dennis the Menace wasn't a guy that actually grabbed a gun and shot up his school. Okay, come on. So, okay, he's talking about the 60s.
I'm sorry, that's not appropriate for me to laugh at. Keep going.
But the point is, it's a different world today. Let's just admit that. And so he got more and more frustrated with this idea of coddling our kids. We need to give them much more freedom. And he says some things about coddling our kids that go, he laments, for example, that teenagers are not having as much sex now today as they were back in the 80s. And I kind of go, and that's called coddling, because do you think parents are more concerned about sexuality with their teenagers today than they were in the 80s? That was purity culture, man. That's when we were trying to force our kids to not even look at each other. So in general, his new thing is he's attaching himself to the mental health crisis with adolescents, which relates to anxiety. Numbers are way up. Perception of loneliness is way off the charts. There's just no question that something occurred somewhere from 2000 until now, but especially shifted in 2012, and he claims it was the advent of the smartphone. So let's get rid of the smartphones, no, not to your 16, out of schools, and almost everybody is now jumping on that bandwagon. I'm not saying he's wrong, but to attribute all of the anxiety and loneliness and fear and chaos in the world for kids to the advent of the smartphone, to me is, I don't want to say naive, but close. Many scholars, if not most, that I've been studying in the midst of all this stuff, because I'm in that game too, trying to understand that, say some really great points, very interesting, helpful in some of what he says, but it's not nuanced to the reality of how culture's changed in the last 30 to 40 years, 50 years, 60 years. It's too simplistic. If you just take your kid's cell phone away, does that mean they're not going to be anxious anymore? Of course not. That's not the factor. It's a symptom of a much deeper issue that's been going on for a lot longer time, even pre-COVID. So that's the first thing is, you guys, the quick fixes that are out there, be careful with them. You be a critical and independent thinker. Read the critiques. Go to Google Scholar instead of just Google to check out how scholars write about these things, how people that really study youth mental health, which is a game that I'm involved in. For those of you that believe this,
let's pivot into that a little bit. What's
go ahead.
So like social media, clear it's not helping our kids. Great. You're suggesting it's that and some other things that are perhaps even more so. What are some of those other factors that would be helpful for parents to be aware of that are really affecting our kids?
Well, the real factors are the ones that I've mentioned here, these four, and add to that the necessity of supportive and committed community. I probably should put that as a fifth thing here, is you've got to have, and a sticky faith I write about, 5 to 1, 5 non-parental adults for every child in order for them to thrive. 5 to 1. It comes out of sticky faith and my work in the book Hurt and Hurt 2.0. So it really is about the erosion of community in North American culture. That actually the best scholar on this way back is a guy named Robert Putnam. He's still at work at Harvard, sociologist, that helped us to see his book Bowling Alone and another book written in the late, that was in 2018, wrote another book on this, that we really don't have people that are in our lives that are supportive of our kids. That's the bottom line problem. Therefore, the power of social media has greater negativity for a kid that lacks relationships that are authentic and supportive from adults.
Mm. And that's what you mean by symptom, that it's simply
social
amplifying the lack of community.
Yeah, social media is not the problem. In fact, there's a lot of pretty healthy kids that are really active on social media, but there's some other factors that are supporting them, undergirding what they bring to social media. I just wrote an article a couple of weeks ago that came out with, it's called Christian Counseling Today, where I call it The Power of Belonging, because they asked me to write a book on teenage anxiety, kind of in response to Jonathan Haidt's stuff. And I started to write it, but I always write that kind of stuff for them. And I always do talks for the American Association of Christian Counselors. And I'm the guy that talks about how hurt kids are, because that's what I study. Well, then I'm sitting at Chipotle, and these about 7 or 8 of these high school junior girls come and sit right next to me. I guess I was safe or something, because there were other tables, but they sat right next to me, pull up chairs. And I'm starting to outline, boy, these are problems with kids. There's the things we got to work on. And then I start to notice there were cell phones there, of course. But if they were on the table, maybe 2 on the table, they were upside down. They weren't even on, maybe. Not one time for 45 minutes did anybody pick up a cell phone. And here's what will be more amazing. They listened to each other. They looked at each other. When somebody's telling a story, they're interested. They engaged. They laughed freely. There was great joy among them. I got to tell you, Scott, the sense I had was kids who are in community that's where all these studies of resilience, which are suspect, because we know kids are not really resilient on their own. They're resilient if they have a power within them that community has fostered. That's key. They become resilient when they have a community that has helped foster within them a strength that they can engage others freely and live into the God-given community that they were created for. So to be a critical and independent thinker means that I need to have a bunch of people around me that support me so I can explore life and ideas with great joy in community. And that's what those girls did. So I wrote an article called The Power of Belonging. And that's the antidote. Yes, you got to figure out how technology is a tool and not a blankie. Okay. I don't know, does Levi go to bed with a blankie or a special stuffed animal?
He has an animal that he likes, little dinosaur.
Okay. Yeah. That little dinosaur, that's what his cell phone's going to become if you give it to him when he's 11 years old and have no community around. He's got nothing else. But you don't want it to be the dinosaur in the crib. You want it to be a tool. And therefore, you treat it like a tool. Let them treat it like a tool. Teach them how to use it. But the key is get them community. Build resilience in them because they know that they have people that they belong to and belong to them.
Okay, do you see a correlation in decline in essentially church attendance and by attendance, I mean like church community, engaging church community, and the rise of anxiety? Would you, and therefore projecting that getting involved in your local church, and by involved, I don't just mean like attending on Sundays, but like involved is a helpful antidote to this loneliness? Because that's what churches are doing. They're trying to suggest this. Do you actually believe that that can be a helpful thing? You know what I mean?
Yeah, golly. Pastors, if there are any that would ever listen to this, and church leaders and parents, the church as institution does not lessen anxiety. The church as institution increases anxiety. I think the big reason why young people are leaving the church is because it creates more anxiety for them, not less. The church as community, the church as living these things I talked about as parents, these 4 things, and community overarching, yes, will reduce anxiety, decrease a sense of loneliness, a a willingness to step aside from the world everything's transactional in our relationships. But boy, we got to make sure we hold the church to account, and it's not creating more anxiety and more strict controls that say, stay inside the box and we'll love you. Don't doubt. Don't push back. No, we invite you kids to be part of us. You're our sibling. You can teach us. Hold us to account. We'll teach you to be critical thinkers, independent thinkers as you follow Jesus, and we do that together. When the church functions as a community, yes, it's great. But when we let it just simply control our lives, sit down, shut up, and smile, that does not help.
Stop talking to the church leaders. What are some things that you see we do that move us towards institutionalism versus moving toward that organic community that you're kind of referencing here? How do we mitigate that?
For parents?
Yes. Talking to ministry leaders so they could potentially adjust some things in their church context to better serve parents.
To create environments of these four things, of creating environments where I can't believe we get to live in community together because Jesus brings us such joy together. I mean, with the starting perspective of how great is this? We get to be in community. We get to worship. We get to sing. We get to learn from each other. Oh, joy. That's tough when you're running a business, a volunteer business, and everybody's an owner. But churches can do that. I know you're planting this church mission OC in Orange County, and you're trying to get at this. How do you, Scott, foster an environment where parents, when they bring their kids or when they come to, or a single person comes, that they walk in, they go, dang, this is joyous. This is good. I feel like I belong. So making sure that this commitment to unity that Jesus prayed about in John 17 is just filled with the joy of being together. That's really the first thing. Then fostering teaching that encourages people to think deeply about their faith in terms of who is Jesus and who we're called to be in light of what his invitation to us is. And then making sure that we're moving through life together. Those are some things. You know what's great about this is you can rewind this and go, now, what's that verse? What did he just say? What are the four things? No sweat. Right there for you. We might even have it in outline.
Those four things one more time. As a bite-sized nugget a parent could take away.
Yeah, first is create an environment of joy. Just make sure that this is a place that's not the heaviness of all concern. Yes, concern matters, but joy is still the bedrock. And secondly, it's foster critical and independent thinking, not critical person, but a joyous person who is discerning. That's second. Thirdly, expand their horizons and perspectives so they see the big world that God loves and they can find their place in that. And lastly, live with Jesus at the center of all life and faith by modeling and teaching that life's about sacrifice and service. In other words, joy, critical, independent thinking that it's not critical, but it's discerning. Thirdly, expand their horizons, their relationships, their perspectives on other people, how they see the world. And lastly, realize that the call of the gospel is to serve. Those four things. And then community is what matters above it all.
Amen.
It's easier said than done, I know. But you know what? Now that we got 5 grandkids and our own kids have gone through pretty serious stuff, I will tell you, they're each on a path where they know they own that. That's the path that they're on. And they have allowed Jesus to be the central driver, all 3 of them, in very different ways. that no chance would we have been able to script the three of them and what they were supposed to believe in the beginning. But as it panned out, Jesus Christ is the one that they trust and follow, and they just do it in different ways and talk about it differently. But they're all making a difference in the world. And so we know it doesn't always work out that way. And I wouldn't say this is prescriptive, but it definitely is descriptive of what Dee and I tried to do along the way. And granted, we had a lot of failures. So hang in there. And remember, God is always at work loving your kids way more than you do.
All right. Thanks again for joining us on this episode of the Curious Podcast. Hope you enjoyed what Chap had to say. Look forward to talking with you more soon.